In a quiet mansion scented with flowers, an elderly woman bears marks on her arms that no one dares to see. Behind smiles and elegant dinners, her daughter-in-law hides a cruel cycle of manipulation and abuse. When an anonymous note reaches the patriarch, the empire of lies begins to crumble. But it's in reclaiming her voice that this woman turns pain into justice and fear into strength. In Spring Gardens, one of the most exclusive gated communities in the Upper East Side of New York, the garden of mansion number 27 was a spectacle in itself. Roses, orchids, and dogwood trees composed a scene worthy of a magazine cover. It was there, among those meticulously cared-for flowers, that Mrs. Helen Montgomery spent her afternoons. At 78, Helen's frail silhouette contrasted with the grandeur of the mansion she herself had built decades ago. Her white hair, always impeccably styled, and her hands marked by time were silent witnesses to a life of hard work. "Mrs. Helen, your chamomile." "Tea is served," announced Joyce, the housekeeper, who had been with the family for over 30 years. Her ever-watchful eyes scanned the garden until they found her employer sitting on her favorite bench, admiring the roses she had planted so many years ago. "Thank you, Joyce," Helen replied, her voice low and hesitant. Her eyes, once bright and determined, now always seemed frightened, as if awaiting a reprimand. Joyce placed the tray on the garden table and discreetly observed her employer. The long sleeves of her dress, even on that warm day, did not completely hide the bruises on the old woman's thin arms. The housekeeper sighed, containing the indignation that grew within her each day. "Do you need anything else, ma'am?" "No, thank you. Has Deborah arrived yet?" Joyce noticed how Helen's voice trembled when she mentioned her daughter-in-law's name. "Not yet, Mrs. Helen, but she called to say she'll be here for dinner with Dr. Richard and the guests." Helen nodded, and a veil of anxiety covered her face. Dinner meant having to behave perfectly. It meant being under the relentless scrutiny of Deborah Vance Montgomery, her daughter-in-law. On the other side of the garden, Sebastian, the gardener, with calloused hands and an easy smile, was carefully trimming the bushes. At 65, with a wisdom that only time can bring, he too was a silent witness to the drama unfolding in that house. "Sebastian," Helen called softly, "the begonias are lovely." The gardener smiled, approaching respectfully. "You have a good eye, ma'am. These are the seedlings that arrived from a specialty nursery upstate last week." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a luxury car parking. A black Range Rover entered majestically through the gate, and Helen stiffened immediately. Joyce and Sebastian exchanged worried glances. Deborah Vance. Montgomery stepped out of the car as if on a runway. At 45, she was the picture of New York elegance, impeccably straightened black hair, designer clothes, high heels, and a posture that exuded confidence. President of a charitable foundation and a constant figure in the society columns, she was admired for her apparent dedication to her family and social causes. "Helen, what are you doing out here in this sun? You'll end up having another one of your spells," Deborah said, approaching with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm just having some tea, dear," Helen replied quickly, trying to stand up. "Let me help you." Deborah gripped her mother-in-law's arm with unnecessary force, making her wince in pain. "You know what the doctor said about sun exposure, and that memory of yours. Tsk, tsk. Have you forgotten already?" Joyce watched from a distance, clenching the dish towel in her fingers. She knew there was no medical recommendation about sun exposure. It was just another of Deborah's fabrications to control every aspect of her mother-in-law's life. "Joyce!" Deborah's voice cut through the air like a razor. "Why did you allow Mrs. Helen to be out here alone? You know her condition. Mrs. Helen wanted to see the flowers, Mrs. Deborah, and I was right here, watching," Joyce answered, maintaining a respectful but firm tone. Deborah shot the housekeeper a look that promised future retaliation. "Come on, Helen. We need to get you ready for dinner. We have important guests tonight." As she led her mother-in-law into the mansion, Deborah whispered out of the staff's earshot, "And don't you embarrass me tonight. No confusing stories or accusations. Remember what happened last time." Helen shuddered. The last time, after trying to tell her son about the mistreatment, she had been locked in her room for 3 days. with her daughter-in-law claiming to her son that his mother was having episodes of mental confusion and needed rest. In the mansion's kitchen, Joyce was preparing appetizers for the dinner while talking in a low voice with Sebastian, who had come in for some water. "I can't stand to see this anymore, Sebastian. Mrs. Helen was a strong woman. She ran that textile factory with an iron fist. To see her reduced to this—" Sebastian shook his head. "Mrs. Deborah is a two-faced snake. One for the world to see, all smiles and charity. Another one in here venomous. Dr. Richard doesn't notice a thing. He thinks his mother is really senile, believes everything that woman makes up. It's because he travels too much, Joyce. An important doctor, always at conferences. He barely stops to see what's happening inside his own home." The sound of footsteps interrupted their conversation. Richard Montgomery, Helen's son and Deborah's husband, entered the kitchen. Tall, with graying hair and a tired expression, he carried the weight of being one of New York's most respected cardiologists. "Good afternoon, Joyce. Sebastian," he greeted them kindly. "Has my mother had dinner?" "Yet?" "No, Doctor. Mrs. Deborah took her upstairs to get ready for tonight's dinner." Richard nodded, distracted. "How is she today?" Joyce hesitated. "Your mother was well, Doctor. Enjoying the garden, as she always has." "Good, good." Richard seemed relieved. "Deborah told me she had another episode of confusion last night. I'm worried." Joyce and Sebastian exchanged quick glances. There had been no episode, only Helen trying to use the phone to call an old friend, which Deborah had not allowed. "If I may, Doctor," Joyce ventured, "Mrs. Helen seems quite lucid most of the time." Richard smiled condescendingly. "You're a good person, Joyce, always defending my mother. But Deborah showed me she wrote some nonsensical things yesterday. And those bruises. She's been falling a lot, hasn't she?" "Bruises?" Sebastian asked, before he could stop himself. "Yes, on her arms. Deborah said she found her fallen in the bathroom last week. That's why we're considering hiring a full-time nurse." Another lie, Joyce thought. Those bruises had the shape of Deborah's fingers. "Excuse me, I'm going to go up and see how things are," Richard said, leaving the kitchen. When they were alone again, Sebastian approached Joyce. "We have to do something, Joyce. This can't go on. I'm scared, Sebastian. If we lose our jobs, who will protect Mrs. Helen? But if we do nothing, one day it might be too late." The gardener's words hung heavy in the air. In the silent kitchen, amidst the aroma of delicacies and the distant murmur of their employers' voices, a decision began to form, a decision that would forever change the fate of that family. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing, dinner at the Montgomery mansion was impeccable as always. The dining room, with its crystal chandelier imported from the Czech Republic and the jacaranda table that seated 16, was the perfect stage for Deborah's social performances. And so, we concluded the campaign with over $1 million raised for the children of Appalachia, she announced, raising her wine glass in a discreet toast. The guests, a couple of entrepreneurs, a local politician, and their respective wives, applauded politely. Helen, seated at the end of the table, smiled mechanically. "Your wife is extraordinary, Richard," praised the politician, a middle-aged man with a calculated smile. "The Vance Institute is an example for all charitable organizations in the country." Richard smiled, proud, while Deborah displayed rehearsed modesty. "It's the least we can do for those in need," she replied. Helen watched the scene with distant eyes. She knew this theatre well. In her youth, she herself had been the protagonist of such dinners when she ran Montgomery Textiles, one of the largest in the country. But that was before the arthritis, before her decision to transfer control of the company to her only son, before Deborah entered their lives. "And you, Mrs. Helen, how have you been?" asked the entrepreneur's wife, a kind woman who had noticed the hostess's silence. Before Helen could answer, Deborah intervened with studied gentleness. "My mother-in-law has been having some difficult days, haven't you, dear? But we take care of her with all our love." Helen felt Deborah's gaze fixed on her like a silent warning. "I'm fine," she replied simply, lowering her eyes to her nearly untouched plate. "Mom has been having some episodes of confusion," Richard explained, with genuine concern. "We're consulting specialists. It's natural at her age," commented the entrepreneur, with the insensitivity of someone who has never reflected on aging. "My mother also started getting forgetful in her 70s. The conversation moved on, leaving Helen increasingly invisible. Under the table, her hands trembled slightly. It wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't confusion. It was fear. Fear that grew with each passing day, with each new manipulation, with each new humiliation. In the kitchen, Joyce and Sebastian, who had stayed to help with the important dinner, watched the activity in the dining room through the slightly ajar door. "Look at that cynicism," Sebastian whispered. "The snake talking about charity, while she mistreats an elderly woman in her own home. Just yesterday, she grabbed her by the hair because Mrs. Helen wanted to watch a soap opera instead of the talk show where the illustrious Mrs. Deborah was going to appear," Joyce revealed, arranging the dessert tray. "And those pills, Joyce. Does Mrs. Helen really need all of that?" The housekeeper shook her head. "Half of them make her dizzy, I'm sure. The other day I hid one of them, and she was much sharper, talked to me normally about old family recipes. She hardly seemed like the same person." "Is that woman drugging her mother-in-law?" Sebastian asked, horrified. "I have no proof, but I suspect. What I do know is that some of the pills don't match what Dr. Richard wrote on the list he gave me." The dinner ended at 10 o'clock, with effusive goodbyes and promises of future get-togethers. When the last car left the property, Deborah finally relaxed her perfect posture. Her smile vanished instantly. "Take my mother-in-law to her room, Joyce, and make sure she takes her sleeping pill." "But Mrs. Deborah, she already took her pills before dinner," Joyce replied, knowing she was treading on dangerous ground. "Are you a doctor now, Joyce?" Deborah's voice took on an icy tone. "Do as I say." Helen, who was watching the scene from the staircase, intervened softly. "It's all right, Joyce. I'll take it." The housekeeper nodded, resigned, and accompanied Helen to her room on the second floor. It was a spacious, elegantly decorated room, but it felt more like a gilded cage. The windows, Helen had noticed a few months ago, now only opened with a key that Deborah kept. "You don't need to take this extra pill," Joyce whispered after closing the door. "It's not on Dr. Richard's prescription." Helen smiled sadly. "If I don't take it, she'll know, and then it will be worse." "Mrs. Helen, you need to tell your son what's happening." "I've tried, Joyce, 3 times. Each time she convinced Richard I was confused, making up stories. The last time she locked me in here for 3 days, told him I was having a paranoid episode." "And your friends? Mrs. Clare, the doctor who always used to visit you?" "Deborah tells everyone I'm too frail to receive visitors. She's blocked my cell phone. She controls my emails. I'm completely isolated." Joyce sat on the edge of the bed, something she would never do if not for the gravity of the situation. "Mrs. Helen, you were one of the most respected businesswomen in this country. You ran that factory when few women held leadership positions. You can't let this woman destroy you like this." Helen's eyes, previously empty, gained a momentary spark. "I know, Joyce. Sometimes I wonder what happened to me, how I let it get to this point. It happened slowly, didn't it? Like water dripping on a stone, wearing you down without you noticing." Helen nodded. "It started after I transferred control of the company to Richard. Little criticisms, comments about my age, suggestions that I should rest more. Then came the lies about my health, pills that made me confused, stories she made up for Richard about things I had supposedly done or said. And Dr. Richard never suspected? My son has always been brilliant in medicine, but naive about people. He believes the best in everyone, and Deborah, she's very smart, very calculating. She's built the perfect image, the dedicated wife, the attentive daughter-in-law, the social benefactor." Joyce gently squeezed her employer's hand. "We'll find a way, Mrs. Helen." Outside the room in the dark hallway, Sebastian overheard the entire conversation. His usually serene expression was transformed by indignation. Something had to be done. The next morning, as Richard was having coffee before leaving for the hospital, Deborah entered the kitchen with a displeased expression. "Joyce, my mother-in-law didn't take her night medication," she accused in a low voice so her husband wouldn't hear. "Yes, she did, Ma'am. I gave it to her myself, as you asked. Then why did I find her wide awake at 6 in the morning, wanting to go down to the garden? Joyce held her gaze steady. Perhaps the medicine didn't work this time, Mrs. Deborah. Or perhaps... You're challenging me, Joyce, Deborah replied, moving dangerously close. Be careful. Maids like you are easily replaceable, especially those over 60. The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Sebastian, entering at that moment with fresh fruit from the orchard, caught the end of the conversation and exchanged a meaningful look with Joyce. That afternoon, while Helen rested and Deborah attended a meeting for her foundation, Joyce and Sebastian met in the tool shed at the back of the property. We can't just keep watching, Sebastian said, determined. Mrs. Helen is going to end up getting truly sick from all the stress and wrong medication. But what can we do? If we talk to Dr. Richard directly, she'll deny everything and have us fired. Sebastian thought for a moment. We need proof, and someone Dr. Richard respects, someone whose word carries more weight than Mrs. Deborah's. Dr. Clare, Joyce remembered, the neurologist, Mrs. Helen's old friend. They went to school together. If we can get her to visit Mrs. Helen... How do we do that without Mrs. Deborah finding out? Joyce smiled, a plan beginning to form in her mind. I'm going to need your help, Sebastian. And we'll have to be very careful. Meanwhile, in Helen's room, the former businesswoman looked out the window at the world from which she was increasingly isolated. Silent tears streamed down her wrinkled face. On the nightstand, an old photo showed a young Helen next to her late husband and little Richard. Those were times of strength, of determination, of control over her own life. I was a Montgomery before I was a mother-in-law, she murmured to herself, and I still am. In her heart, a small spark of resistance began to grow, fueled by the dignity that not even years of abuse had managed to completely extinguish. Joyce and Sebastian's plan began to take shape on a mild, sunny Wednesday. Richard had traveled to a conference in Chicago and would be away for 3 days. It was the perfect opportunity, but also the most dangerous period for Helen, as Deborah always intensified her mistreatment in her husband's absence. We need to be quick, Joyce said, while pretending to clean the plant pots on the veranda. Sebastian, trimming the nearby bushes, nodded discreetly. The first step was to contact Dr. Clare Foster. After years of friendship interrupted by Deborah's maneuvers, the renowned neurologist had lost touch with Helen. On the rare occasions she called, Deborah would say her mother-in-law was resting or unwell, promising return calls that never happened. Joyce took advantage of a shopping trip and used a payphone at the supermarket to call the doctor's office. After much insistence with the secretary, she managed to speak directly with Dr. Clare. Doctor, this is Joyce, the housekeeper at Mrs. Helen Montgomery's house. I need you to come visit her urgently, but without her daughter-in-law knowing. On the other end of the line, there was a moment of silence. What's going on, Joyce? Is Helen sick? She is, doctor, but not in the way everyone thinks. Mrs. Deborah, she doesn't treat Mrs. Helen well. She manipulates, lies, makes her seem senile, and I think she's giving her unprescribed medication. Another silence, longer this time. When Claire spoke again, her voice was filled with determination. I always suspected something. Helen suddenly stopped taking my calls, then started cancelling our lunches. Deborah always had very convenient excuses. They arranged for Claire to show up at the mansion the next day, feigning a casual visit. Joyce would ensure that Helen was in the garden, where she could talk to her friend away from Deborah's watchful ears. Back at the mansion, Joyce found Sebastian with a grave expression. What happened? She asked, worried. Mrs. Deborah locked Mrs. Helen in her room. She said she tried to call Dr. Richard to tell him absurd stories about her. Now what? Dr. Clare is coming tomorrow. Sebastian pulled a small key from his pocket. I made a copy of this from the bedroom lock while Mrs. Deborah was in the shower. We can let Mrs. Helen out when it's safe. The rest of the day passed in a quiet tension. Deborah spent hours on the phone in her office, planning a charity event for the following month. This was their chance. When night fell, Joyce discreetly went up to the second floor, under the pretext of checking for laundry. Using the key Sebastian had provided, she silently opened the door to Helen's room. The elderly woman was sitting in the armchair by the window, looking at the moonlit garden. Her face showed tear stains, but her eyes were dry, as if there was nothing left to cry. "Mrs. Helen," Joyce whispered, "Dr. Clare is coming tomorrow." Helen turned, surprised. "Claire? How did you reach her?" "I called from the supermarket. She was very worried and wants to see you. Tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon, in the garden. I'll make sure Mrs. Deborah is busy." A fragile smile lit up Helen's tired face. "Joyce, you're an angel. Now rest, Mrs. Helen. You'll need your strength tomorrow." The next morning, Deborah announced at breakfast that she needed to go to the mall to buy a dress for the charity event. "I'll be out all afternoon, Joyce. Make sure my mother-in-law takes all her medication on time." "Yes, ma'am," Joyce replied, containing her satisfaction. The plan was working perfectly. As soon as Deborah's car left the property, Joyce ran to Helen's room. She found her employer sitting in the same armchair as if she hadn't moved all night. "Come on, Mrs. Helen. You need to take a refreshing bath and get ready. Dr. Clare will be here in 2 hours." The warm bath and Joyce's care worked wonders. Slowly, Helen began to recover some of her lost dignity. She chose a navy blue dress, elegant without being too formal, and let Joyce style her hair. "I'm nervous, Joyce. What if Deborah comes back early? What if Claire doesn't believe me?" "Dr. Clare has been your friend for over 50 years, Mrs. Helen. She will believe you, and Sebastian is watching the gate. He'll warn us if Mrs. Deborah returns ahead of schedule." At 3 o'clock sharp, the intercom announced a visitor. Sebastian, following the plan, led Dr. Clare directly to the back garden, where Helen was waiting under the shade of a dogwood tree. The reunion of the friends was emotional. Claire, an energetic 75-year-old woman, hugged Helen for a long time, not hiding her concern upon noticing her friend's frailty. "Helen, what has happened to you? You're so thin, so worn out." The words triggered a cry that had been held back for months. Through tears, Helen told her everything: the daily humiliations, the forced isolation, the pills that left her confused, the lies to Richard, the bruises. Claire listened with growing indignation, occasionally asking questions to clarify details. Her expression shifted between shock and controlled fury. "This is elder abuse, Helen. It's a crime." "No one believes me, Claire. Deborah has built this image of a dedicated daughter-in-law so well, and me with my arthritis, the normal memory, lapses of old age. Who's going to believe the old woman over the social benefactor?" "I believe you," Claire affirmed, holding her friend's hands, "and we're going to make Richard believe you too." While the friends talked, Sebastian, strategically positioned near the main gate, saw Deborah's car returning. He ran to warn Joyce, who immediately went to the garden. "Mrs. Deborah is coming back," she warned, out of breath. "She can't see me here," Claire said, standing up. "Helen, I'm leaving now, but I will be back, I promise." "Wait," Joyce requested. "Doctor, could you examine the pills Mrs. Helen is taking? I'm sure some of them weren't prescribed by Dr. Richard." "Where are they?" "In the dresser drawer in her room." "Let's go, quickly," Claire decided. The three of them hurried upstairs to the room. Joyce opened the drawer and handed the doctor the various medicine bottles. Claire examined them with an increasingly worried expression. "This one is a strong antipsychotic, not recommended for the elderly, and this is a sedative that can cause confusion and disorientation. Helen, who prescribed these?" "Deborah said it was Richard, but I never saw him prescribe them. I am absolutely certain your son would never prescribe this combination for you. This is dangerous, Helen." The sound of the car parking interrupted them. Claire quickly put 2 of the bottles in her purse. "I'm going to have these analyzed and confront Richard. Stay strong, Helen. We're going to get you out of this situation." Claire barely had time to get down the stairs before Deborah entered the house. In the entrance hall, the 2 women met. The shock on Deborah's face was momentary, quickly replaced by a false smile. "Dr. Foster, what a pleasant surprise." "Hello, Deborah. I came to visit my friend Helen." "What a shame you didn't call. Helen is resting. She had a difficult morning." "That's strange," Claire replied with feigned innocence. "I just saw her in the garden, and she seemed quite well." Deborah's smile faltered. "You saw her? Who let her out of her room?" Realizing her slip, Deborah tried to recover. I mean, who accompanied her to the garden? She's been so unstable lately, it's not safe to leave her alone." Claire maintained a neutral expression, but her eyes analyzed Deborah with the same clinical rigor she applied to her patients. "I understand your concern, Deborah. In fact, I'm thinking of running some tests on Helen. As a neurologist, I've noticed some worrying symptoms." "What kind of symptoms?" Deborah asked, suddenly alert. "I'd prefer to discuss this with Richard present as well. By the way, when does he get back from his trip?" "Tomorrow night," Deborah answered, visibly uncomfortable. "But don't worry, we have an excellent geriatrician who takes care of her. Even so, I'd like to speak with you both. I'll stop by the day after tomorrow." Claire said her goodbyes and left, leaving Deborah frozen in the entrance hall. As soon as the door closed, the mask of cordiality fell. With furious steps, Deborah stormed up the stairs towards Helen's room. Joyce, who had heard everything from the hallway, ran to warn her employer. "She's coming, and she's furious." Helen, sitting on the bed, took a deep breath. "I'm ready for her, Joyce." The door flew open violently. Deborah entered like a storm, her eyes blazing with fury. "What did you say to that meddling old woman?" she demanded, grabbing Helen's arm forcefully. "The truth, Deborah. Only the truth." The slap was so fast that Helen had no time to flinch. Her head snapped to the side from the impact, leaving a red mark on her cheek. "You don't know what the truth is, you senile old hag," Deborah screamed. "You think anyone is going to believe you? Your own doctor friend left here thinking you're crazy." "That's not true," Helen replied, with a calmness that surprised even herself. "Claire knows exactly what's happening, and soon Richard will know too." The mention of her husband made Deborah recoil momentarily. Her calculating brain quickly shifted strategies. "You always wanted to break us up. From the beginning, you always hated me, always thought I wasn't good enough for your precious son." "No, Deborah, I truly believed in you at the beginning. It was you who showed your true colors." Joyce, standing at the door, watched the scene with a heavy heart. She had never seen Helen stand up to her daughter-in-law this way. It was as if Claire's visit had awakened something inside her, a spark of the strong woman she had once been. "This isn't over," Deborah threatened, storming out of the room and slamming the door behind her. Sebastian, who had come up to see what was happening, found Joyce in the hallway. "We have to do something more," he said, worried. "Mrs. Deborah will try to stop Dr. Claire from talking to Dr. Richard," Joyce agreed. "We need something concrete, something Dr. Richard can't ignore." That night, while the mansion slept, Joyce wrote a simple note. With Sebastian's help, she managed to hide it under the coffee cup that Richard would use for his first breakfast after returning from his trip. A short message, but one that would plant the seed of doubt. "If something ever happens, look at your mother's arms." Richard Montgomery returned from Chicago on Friday night, exhausted after 3 days of lectures and medical debates. He found the house quiet, with only Deborah awake waiting for him with a light dinner. "How was the conference, my love?" she asked, pouring him a glass of wine. "Productive but tiring," he replied, loosening his tie. "How are things here? Is Mom okay?" "Oh, Richard," Deborah sighed dramatically. "Your mother had a few confusing episodes. Just yesterday, she made up a story for Dr. Foster that I mistreat her. Can you imagine?" Richard frowned. "Claire was here." "She showed up unannounced. I spoke with her afterward, explained your mother's condition. She understood, of course, but suggested some tests. I think she's just trying to profit from it." "Claire isn't that kind of professional, Deborah. She's been a family friend for decades." "People change, Richard," Deborah replied, gently touching her husband's hand. "Speaking of which, I think we need to consider a specialized facility for your mother. She's becoming aggressive. She tried to hit me yesterday." Richard looked shocked. "Mom? Impossible." "I didn't want to believe it either, but look." Deborah showed a mark on her arm, a small bruise she had intentionally caused by squeezing her own arm tightly. "I'm worried she might hurt herself or someone else." Richard ran a hand through his graying hair, visibly disturbed. "I'll talk to her tomorrow, and maybe we should schedule an appointment with Claire, since she's already aware of the situation." "As you wish, dear," Deborah replied, trying to hide her irritation. "Now go get some rest, you look exhausted." The next morning, Richard came down for breakfast, served punctually at 7:30 a.m. by Joyce. Deborah was still asleep, as was her custom on Saturdays. As he sat at the table, Richard noticed something under his cup, a small folded piece of paper. Intrigued, he opened it and read the message, "If something ever happens, look at your mother's arms." His first impulse was to dismiss it as some tasteless joke or a mistake, but something about the simplicity of the sentence unsettled him. As he drank his coffee, he watched Joyce more closely. The housekeeper, always efficient and discreet, seemed more tense than usual. "Joyce, how was my mother these past few days while I was away?" The housekeeper hesitated for a moment before answering. "Mrs. Helen has her good days and bad days, Doctor. And yesterday, Deborah told me she tried to attack her. Did you see that happen?" Joyce clenched the dish towel in her hands. "I didn't see any aggression, Doctor. I was in the kitchen preparing lunch." "But did you hear anything? Shouting, an argument?" "I heard raised voices coming from Mrs. Helen's room, yes. But I couldn't say what happened exactly." Richard nodded thoughtfully. He finished his coffee and went upstairs to see his mother. He found her already awake, sitting in her favorite armchair, looking out at the garden. "Good morning, Mum," he said, kissing her forehead. "Richard, my son." Helen's eyes lit up. "How was your trip?" "Good, thank you. And you, how are you feeling?" "I'm feeling well today," she answered with a fragile smile. Richard pulled up a chair and sat in front of her. For a moment, he just observed his mother. He noticed how she seemed thinner, more fragile than he remembered. Her eyes, once so vibrant and determined, now seemed constantly apprehensive. "Mum, Deborah told me you tried to attack her yesterday. What happened?" Helen shook her head in disbelief. "That's not true, Richard. She was the one who attacked me." "What do you mean?" "She slapped me because Claire came to visit. She didn't want me talking to anyone, especially not Claire." Richard frowned, confused by this completely different version of events. "But Deborah showed me a bruise on her arm." "She lies, Richard," Helen replied, her voice weary. "She has always lied. For years." "Mom, why would you say something like that? Deborah takes care of you. She worries." "Because it's the truth," Helen interrupted, with a firmness that surprised her son. "And if you don't believe me, maybe you'll believe this." Helen slowly rolled up the sleeves of her housecoat, revealing several bruises on her thin arms. Some were recent, others already fading to yellow. Richard turned pale. The words from the mysterious note echoed in his mind. "Look at your mother's arms." "Who did this, Mum?" he asked, his voice choked. "Your wife, Richard. When you're not here, she grabs me forcefully. She pushes me, sometimes she hits me. She says no one will believe me because I'm just a senile old woman. Why did you never tell me?" "I tried, 3 times. Each time she convinced you I was confused, making things up. Remember when I was resting in my room for 3 days? I was locked in. Richard, locked in by your wife." The doctor was stunned. The idea that Deborah, his partner of over 15 years, could be mistreating his mother was almost inconceivable. And yet there were the marks. Real, undeniable. "I need to think," he murmured, standing up. "This is a lot to process." "I understand, son," Helen replied gently. "But please don't tell her we spoke. I'm afraid of what she might do." Richard nodded distractedly and left the room. In the hallway, he ran into Sebastian, who was apparently passing by with some tools. "Good morning, Dr. Richard," the gardener greeted him. "I need to fix the blind in Mrs. Helen's room. It's sticking." Richard looked at the man who had worked in his house for so many years, trustworthy, discreet. "Sebastian, have you noticed anything strange between my wife and my mother?" The gardener paused, gripping his tools tighter than necessary. "What do you mean, Doctor?" "Anything. Arguments, aggression, bruises on my mother." Sebastian glanced from side to side, visibly uncomfortable. "Doctor, I've worked here a long time. Your family gave me a chance when no one else would for a man my age. I wouldn't want to cause any trouble." "You're not causing trouble, Sebastian. I'm asking for your help." After a long moment of hesitation, the gardener spoke in a low voice. "I've seen Mrs. Deborah grab your mother's arms very forcefully. I've heard her yelling at her when you're not home. And one time I saw her push Mrs. Helen against the wall because she wanted to use the telephone." Richard closed his eyes, feeling as if the world was collapsing on his shoulders. "Thank you, Sebastian. Please don't mention this conversation to anyone, not even Joyce." "Yes, Doctor." Stunned, Richard went downstairs and out into the garden. He needed to breathe, to think. As a doctor, he was used to analyzing symptoms, making difficult diagnoses. But this was his family, his life. In the midst of his mental turmoil, his phone rang. It was Claire. "Richard, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "About your mother. It's urgent." "I'm heading out for a run in the park," he replied, making a quick decision. "Can you meet me at the Arboretum Cafe in an hour?" "I'll be there." When he hung up, he noticed Deborah standing at the veranda door watching him. How long? Had she been there? Had she overheard the conversation? "Good morning, my love," she said, approaching to kiss him. "Who were you talking to so early?" "A colleague from the hospital," he lied, surprising himself with the ease of it. "Trouble with a patient. I have to go out and deal with it." "But it's Saturday," Deborah protested with a rehearsed pout. "I thought we could spend the day together." "Me too, but it's an emergency. I shouldn't be long." At the Arboretum Cafe, a charming spot near Central Park, Richard waited anxiously. Claire arrived on time carrying a folder. After the initial greetings, she got straight to the point. "Richard, your mother is being abused by your wife." He sighed, running a hand over his face. "I know, or rather I just found out. I saw the bruises on her arms this morning." "It's not just bruises, Richard. She's being improperly medicated." Claire opened the folder and showed him the 2 medicine bottles she had taken from Helen's room. "This is a strong antipsychotic, not indicated for the elderly. And this is a sedative that can cause confusion, disorientation, and even hallucinations in geriatric patients. Did you prescribe these?" "Of course not," he exclaimed, horrified. "I would never prescribe this for my mother. Where did she get—" "Your wife," Claire replied simply. "Helen told me that Deborah claims these were prescribed by you." Richard felt his stomach turn. "My God, Claire, what have I done? How did I not see this happening under my own nose?" "You work a lot, Richard, and Deborah is extremely skilled at manipulating the situation. She isolated Helen, controlled who could visit her, and convinced everyone she was senile and confused. It's a classic pattern of abuse. What should I do? First, get your mother out of that house immediately. Then document everything. The bruises, the improper medications, the statements from the housekeeper and the gardener, if they agree to testify." Richard nodded, determined. "I'm taking her to my apartment in Brooklyn Heights today. I rarely use it, but it's furnished and ready." "Excellent. And I can see her at my clinic on Monday for a full evaluation and medico-legal documentation." "Thank you, Claire, for noticing what I, as both a doctor and a son, failed to see." The doctor squeezed her friend's hand with compassion. "Don't blame yourself too much, Richard. Abusers, like Deborah, are experts at creating perfect facades." When Richard returned to the mansion, he found a seemingly peaceful scene. Deborah was in the garden, reading a design magazine, while Helen was resting in her room, according to Joyce. "I'm going up to see how she is," he said. "Of course, dear. Can we have lunch together afterward?" Deborah asked with her most charming smile. "Maybe. I need to take care of a few things first." In Helen's room, Richard found his mother sleeping. Or so it seemed. As soon as he closed the door, she opened her eyes. "It's you, Richard." "Yes, Mom, I'm here to help you. We're leaving this house today." Helen's eyes widened. "Today?" "Yes. I'm taking you to my apartment. Joyce will go with you to help you settle in." You believed me?" "I believe you, Mom, and forgive me for not realizing it sooner." Silent tears streamed down Helen's wrinkled face. "Thank you, my son." Richard hugged his mother carefully, feeling the frailty of her body, but also the strength of her spirit, which, even after so much suffering, had not completely broken. "I'm going to ask Joyce to pack your things discreetly." "I don't want to alert Deborah before I get you out of here," Helen agreed silently. As Richard left the room, she looked out the window at the garden where her daughter-in-law was reading peacefully. completely oblivious to the storm about to break over her carefully constructed life. Helen's departure from the mansion had to be executed perfectly. Richard knew that Deborah wouldn't let her mother-in-law leave without creating a scene, especially if she suspected the real reasons. "Joyce," he called discreetly as the housekeeper was tidying a guest room, "I need your help to get my mother out of this house today." The housekeeper's eyes shone with relief. "Thank God, Doctor. What do I need to do?" "Pack a small bag with the essentials for my mother, clothes, medications, the correct ones, and some personal items of sentimental value. Do it when Deborah isn't looking." Joyce nodded. "Leave it to me, Doctor, and then I'm going to tell Deborah that I'm taking Mum for some tests at the hospital. Once we're out of here, we won't be coming back." "I understand. And will you continue to live here, with Mrs. Deborah?" The question caught Richard by surprise. He hadn't thought that. Far ahead, his focus was on rescuing his mother from the abusive situation. "I don't know, Joyce. For now, I need to ensure my mother's safety. After that, I'll deal with my marriage." As they spoke in low voices, they didn't notice Deborah approaching down the hall. She stopped before being seen partially hiding behind a column and strained to listen. "And don't worry," Richard continued. "You won't lose your job. If you'd like, you can come work for us at the apartment. I'm sure Mum would be much more comfortable with you around." "It would be an honor, Doctor. Taking care of Mrs. Helen is more than a job for me." Deborah retreated silently, her beautiful face contorted by a look of restrained fury. So that was it. Her husband was planning to take his mother out of her house, out of her control, and take the meddling housekeeper with him. Everything was falling apart. She returned quickly to the garden, where she pretended to read her magazine. She needed to think, to plan a counterattack. She couldn't allow Helen to leave that house and expose everything that had happened. Her reputation, her social standing, her marriage, everything would be at risk. In her room, Helen finished dressing with Joyce's help. She had chosen a teal suit, simple but elegant, and a pearl necklace her late husband had given her on their 40th wedding anniversary. She wanted to leave that house with dignity. "You look beautiful, Ma'am," Joyce commented, adjusting the necklace. "Thank you," Helen replied with a fragile smile. "You know, Joyce, for a long time I thought I wouldn't leave this house alive, that my last days would be filled with humiliation and suffering. You and Sebastian gave me hope when I had none left." The housekeeper gently squeezed her employer's hand. "You deserve peace, Mrs. Helen, and justice." Outside in the hallway, Sebastian waited with a small, packed suitcase. Richard had asked for his help to put it in the car without Deborah noticing. "All set, Dr. Richard," the gardener informed him. "I put the bag in the trunk of your car, through the back entrance." "Thank you, Sebastian, and thank you for telling me the truth this morning. I know it wasn't easy." "It was the least I could do, Doctor. Seeing Mrs. Helen suffer all these years, and it was like watching my own mother being mistreated." Richard nodded, moved. "After we sort this out, I'd like you to consider coming to work for us as well, taking care of the gardens at the apartment complex." "It would be an honor, Doctor." Everything was ready. Helen, assisted by Joyce, slowly descended the stairs. Her steps were cautious, but there was a new determination in her eyes. For the first time in years, she was making a decision about her own life. Richard was waiting for her in the entrance hall. "Ready, Mom?" "Ready, son." Just as they were about to leave, Deborah appeared as, if by chance, coming in from the garden. "Where are you two going?" she asked, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm taking Mom for some tests at the hospital," Richard answered, keeping his voice casual. "Claire recommended a full workup to better assess her condition." "How wonderful, darling. Just let me grab my purse and I'll go with you." "That's not necessary, Deborah. I know you had plans for today. Besides, it could take a while, and the hospital is not a pleasant place to spend a Saturday." Deborah's smile faltered for a second, but she quickly recovered it. "Don't be silly. What kind of wife would I be if I didn't accompany my dear mother-in-law at a time like this?" Helen felt the familiar fear rise in her chest. If Deborah came along, the escape plan would be jeopardized. "Actually," Joyce intervened, surprising everyone, "I received a call while I was tidying up the room. Mrs. Olivia from the Foundation is trying to reach you urgently, Mrs. Deborah. Something about next week's charity gala. Deborah hesitated, visibly torn between maintaining control over Helen and attending to a matter related to her public image. Are you sure? It was urgent, Joyce, she asked, a hint of suspicion in her voice. Yes, ma'am. She said it was about the speech you're giving. It seems the governor has confirmed his attendance and they need to adjust the protocol. The mention of the governor settled the matter. The charity gala was the most important social event of the year for Deborah, her chance to shine before New York's elite. Well, in that case... Richard, are you sure you don't want me to come later? I could meet you at the hospital after I sort this out. Don't worry, he replied, with a calmness he didn't feel. I'll take care of everything. We might even be late, depending on the wait for the tests. You know how the healthcare system is, even in the private sector. Deborah nodded, still looking suspicious. She approached Helen and kissed her cheek with false affection. Take care, dear, I'll be thinking of you. Helen felt a shiver run down her spine at the touch of those cold lips on her skin. Thank you, Deborah, she replied mechanically. As they walked to the car, Helen felt as if she were escaping from a prison. Every step out of that mansion was a step towards freedom. Once in the vehicle, with Joyce in the back seat and Helen beside him, Richard breathed a sigh of relief. We did it, he murmured. Not yet, Joyce warned. She might get suspicious and follow us. I think we should go somewhere else first to throw her off. Richard agreed. Instead of heading straight for his apartment in Brooklyn Heights, he drove towards St. Luke's Hospital, where he worked. After circling the parking lot, he left through another exit and took a completely different route. Throughout the drive, Helen remained silent, looking out the window at the streets of New York as if seeing them for the first time. In a way, it was true. How long had it been since she had left that mansion without Deborah's controlling presence? At Richard's apartment, a spacious and modern place in a secure building, Helen could finally relax. Sitting on the balcony overlooking a small park, she took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of oppression begin to lift. Are you comfortable, Mom? Richard asked, bringing her some tea. More than I have been in a very long time, son. Joyce, who had already organized Helen's room, joined them on the balcony. Dr. Richard, what happens now? Richard ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he made when he was nervous or pensive. We need to document everything. The bruises, the improper medication, the statements. On Monday, I'll take Mum to Claire's clinic for a full evaluation, and then we'll decide on the next legal steps. Legal? Helen asked, surprised. You want to sue Deborah? I want justice, Mom. What she did is a crime. Elder abuse, improper administration of controlled substances without a prescription, false imprisonment. The list is long. Helen was silent for a moment, processing the idea. Part of her just wanted to forget, to move on, to reclaim her life in peace. But another part, the strong businesswoman who had commanded hundreds of employees, knew that justice was necessary, not just for her, but for all the other Helens who might be suffering in silence. All right, she finally agreed. We'll do what's necessary. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Deborah paced back and forth in her room, furious. She had called Olivia from the Foundation, only to discover there was no urgency about the charity gala. The housekeeper had lied blatantly. That meddler, she muttered, gripping her phone tightly. She'll regret this. She tried calling Richard's cell, but he didn't answer. She called the hospital, where they informed her that Dr. Montgomery hadn't been there that day. The truth finally hit her like a slap. They weren't coming back. Helen had escaped her control. With a scream of rage, Deborah threw her phone against the wall, shattering it. Her castle of lies was crumbling. If Helen talked, if she told them everything that had happened in that house, her perfect life would be ruined. In the office, Deborah opened the liquor cabinet and poured herself a generous glass of whiskey. As the drink burned its way down her throat, her calculating mind was already working on a counterattack. She would not let Helen destroy everything she had built. There would be consequences. Sebastian, who was pruning the roses near the office window, observed his employer through the glass. Her expression, contorted with hatred, was terrifying. The gardener quickly moved away, afraid of being seen. He needed to warn Joyce and the others. The storm was just beginning. On Monday, as planned, Helen went to Claire's clinic. The neurologist conducted a series of physical and cognitive exams, meticulously documenting the bruises and other signs of abuse. "You're surprisingly well considering everything you've been through," Claire commented as she reviewed the preliminary results. "Your cognition is almost entirely intact. Those medications could have caused permanent damage." "I have a feeling Joyce wasn't giving me all of them," Helen confided. "I think she was substituting some with vitamins or a placebo." "Joyce deserves a medal," Claire replied, smiling. Richard, who was observing the consultation, felt a wave of gratitude for the loyal housekeeper. "We need to keep her safe, Claire. Deborah must be furious with her too. Don't worry, I've already spoken to a friend who's a police captain. He's aware of the situation and can offer protection if needed." After the consultation, the next step was a meeting with a lawyer, Ms. Marion Fowler, a specialist in elder law and domestic violence. In her office in downtown Manhattan, she listened intently to Helen's account, taking detailed notes. "We have a solid case, Mrs. Montgomery," the lawyer concluded. "Physical and psychological abuse, improper administration of medication, forced social isolation, all of this constitutes violence against the elderly under the Elder Justice Act." "What would be the consequences for my wife?" Richard asked, with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Depending on the proven severity, it could range from 2 to 5 years in prison, in addition to civil damages. However, cases like this rarely result in actual prison time for first-time upper-class offenders, but the conviction itself is significant, especially for someone with your wife's social standing." Helen nodded thoughtfully. "I'm not seeking revenge. I'm seeking justice. And most importantly, I want to ensure she doesn't do the same to other vulnerable seniors." "That's admirable, Mrs. Montgomery," Marion replied. "And we can include protective measures that would prevent her from working with charities related to the elderly in the future." As they left the lawyer's office, Helen felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in years, she envisioned a future where she would no longer be a victim, but the protagonist of her own story once again. The legal proceedings against Deborah Vance Montgomery unfolded over 8 tense months. During this period, New York's elite was divided between those who believed the philanthropist with the impeccable reputation and those who were beginning to see the truth behind the carefully constructed facade. The final hearing took place on a rainy October morning. The Manhattan Criminal Courthouse was filled with journalists, onlookers, and socialites,